Okay. I have had quite a few requests since I started doing YouTube to do some budgeting type of videos. And I've always kind of shied away from it because I'm not an expert or anything. But I have been married 30 years. I have been in charge of our, excuse me, finances for 30 years. So I do have some, I guess, advice, and I've made a lot of mistakes and I've made a lot of good decisions. So I just thought I'd share a few of those with you. This will probably be a three-part series. I'm not really sure, but that's kind of what I'm thinking. Okay, I'm going to mainly talk to, well, anybody can hear this, but at first today I'm going to mainly talk to newlyweds or people that have been for that are just married and kind of setting up their house and setting up their life together. Um, and a lot of these principles apply to everybody, of course, but that's kind of who I'm talking to because that was me, okay? 30 years ago, when my husband and I first got married, we got married on a Saturday, and on Monday morning, we moved from Houston out 9 hours west to West Texas. My husband was in the oil field. He had already been up there working for the summer. We got married in August, and then we both went out there, okay? Um, I assumed that I would get a job when we got there. But we had the discussion before we got married. I think it's important to have some discussions before you get married about what you want out of life and what your plans are. We had already had the discussion before we got married that I told my husband when I have children, I want to be a stay-at-home mom. And he said, fine, that's great. That's how we'll operate. And I said, okay. But here I am, a newlywed. I'm probably going to get a job, right? Well, we get to West Texas, and my husband was he worked in the oil field, like I said. He was working 24/7. He was on call for 26 days a month. No, 24 days a month. And then he had 6 days off in a row. The first week we were married, he was gone 5 days. I sat in this rent house in the middle of nowhere by myself, kind of scared at night, actually. It was very scary. I didn't know anybody. Who was I going to call if I had a problem? I don't even know if they had 911 back then in the 1800s when I first got married. But anyway, okay. So I said, I'm going to get a job. And my husband said, well, gosh, I really don't want you to have a job because what did we do every single month on those 6 days? We hightailed it out of town because the town was extremely boring. It had a TGNY. I don't even think we had a McDonald's. We had one of those off, like a Dairy Queen, seriously. And there was nothing to do in this town. It was extremely boring. We had been used to parties and frat house and all that kind of stuff. So this was like a shock, right? So he said, I really don't want you to work because we leave town every month. And I was kind of like, yeah, I kind of agree. So I did oddball things and everything. But because he worked so many hours, I immediately became the keeper of the home, the finances, and everything, all the phone calls, everything, setting up the cable, everything. You had to have cable in that town. There was no antenna action. We were too far from civilization for an antenna to work. Anyway, so we lived there for 2 years. We were happy. I learned a lot about paying the bills. I learned a lot about budgeting, kind of budgeting. I'll talk about that in a minute, but I did a pretty good job. I learned a lot because I went into the marriage knowing nothing about money, zero. My parents paid for everything. That was my experience with money. I did have jobs in the summer in high school, but anyway. So then he quit that job. That was a pretty good job. He made pretty good money, and we moved to Dallas, and we just thought we were going to get this great job immediately and set the world on fire. Well, guess what? That didn't happen. Then began our struggle. But long story short, this is really a video about handling your finances and handling your money. So as far as budgets go, for me personally, a budget has never worked for me. Maybe I don't understand how to do it, but to me, life is so unpredictable that when I would make a budget, yeah, okay, I could put my electric bill down, the rent down, the food sort of down. I never knew how much to spend for food. I just spent what I thought we needed to eat. You could put your basic bills down, but to me, the biggest category was always miscellaneous. And I could never figure out how to divide miscellaneous into categories. I mean, some people have a clothing budget. Well, I don't buy clothes every month. I don't like to shop. So to have a $50, $100 clothes budget, did that mean I had to go every single month and spend $100? But what if I needed a bunch of new clothes all of a sudden because I don't normally shop and I needed $200? I didn't like that. I didn't do budgets like that. I just knew that we had to put money in savings, pay all our bills, and what was left I could divide out and spend over 4 weeks is kind of how I did it in my head. But I never had a budget written out. It just didn't work for me. Now, I do have a lot of friends who love to shop, and they can't really say no to things. So they've asked their husband, please give me a budget because I will spend every single penny every single month and more if you don't control it for me, sort of. So you kind of have to know yourself. I don't ever have to be like that because that's just not me. Spending money is not my favorite thing to do, I guess. So we've never really had a budget except in my head, okay? That's how it works for me. But if you need a budget, do it and stick with it or whatever you think you need to do. And my budget also over the years has been pay cash only. If you cannot afford to pay for it right then, you don't buy it other than maybe a house or a car. That's my rule of thumb. That's my budget in my head. Stop it, Ginger. Okay. So like I said, budgeting is so unpredictable. I wrote a few things down, and I'm trying to read them without my glasses. I always kind of knew how much we had in the bank. We always had an emergency fund that helps with the miscellaneous category. There's sometimes you have to get new tires for your car. You have to get, a new starter on your car. Whatever it is, you need that emergency fund for those kind of expenses. You know what I mean? So we always had an emergency fund, and it wasn't very big for years and years and years. It was not very big. And sometimes we had bigger emergencies than our fund. So what do you do when that happens? Well, I was real against debt and budget. I'm mainly talking credit card debt. So one time we had had a lot of different things happen, and our credit card had like $2,000 on it. I could not sleep at night. I could not stand that. I could not stand owing somebody that. That seemed like a mountain of money to me. Huge. Once we got that paid off, I made a decision then. Only absolute emergencies are for credit cards. Unless you pay your credit card bill every single month off. Okay? So, what do I mean by this? What I mean is we never would go out to dinner to a fancy steak restaurant and charge it if we knew we couldn't pay for it in full at the end of the month. Everything we did like that. Because who wants to pay for a meal that you digested 30 days ago? I mean, to me, that is so ridiculous. Don't eat out if you can't just pay for it. Just eat at home. It's real simple. If you can't pay for something, just don't get it. Now, what would we use our credit card for? Let's say the refrigerator completely went out and died. That would be something that back then I would have put on the credit card because maybe I didn't have $1,000 in my emergency fund, or maybe that would have depleted my emergency fund years ago. Might be something I would put on a charge card because it's in a real emergency. You really do have to have a refrigerator in your life. Now, do you have to have a brand new one? No, you can buy a used one. I mean, I don't know. Think about it. Think like that. But something like a fridge, I would buy new if I could. So I am really anti-debt. I don't like debt. I don't, as we progressed in our lives and in our finances, we started paying cash for everything except our house. Everything else was cash. What I see a lot of young people do is they think they have to buy new, and they think they have to buy things, major purchases, right when they get married or within the first year or so. You really don't have to. We didn't buy a home till we'd been married probably 5 years. First of all, we never had the down payment saved up. That's a ridiculous amount of money. So, we didn't buy a house for a long time. I would say don't feel pressured by anyone to buy things that you're not ready to buy. Now, back to the decision we made. Oh, I don't know if I told you whether I worked or not when we were living in West Texas. Yeah, I told you that I didn't work back then. We moved to Dallas and I did work. But in the back of our minds was always the decision that we had made that I would be a stay-at-home mom. So how does that decision work before you have kids? Let me tell you how it works. You don't buy things that require both of your incomes. You have to think it through. Think through major purchases. If you buy a $250,000 house and that requires two incomes, buy a $175,000 house and you can make the payment on one income. Do you see what I mean? Make those decisions before. Be honest. Women, I don't think, are very honest with their husbands. Sometimes I think they know they want to be a stay-at-home mom and they don't tell him. And then when they have the baby, they act like the world's going to come to an end because he wants them to work, and they blame him for all of that when you both made those decisions and maybe you weren't totally honest with him. I was totally honest. So we did all of our things that we bought, we only bought with one income, even when I worked. And it was very helpful for me to work before kids because that was helping to build our emergency fund. And if we wanted to go on a little trip, we would have a little bit of money to go on a trip because my income wasn't going into the household fund. It was kind of just there, if that makes any sense. So then when I quit my job when I had my first child, it was very big of a struggle, believe me, but it wasn't impossible to do. So I would say, of this video of my 3-part series, the number one thing I would say is when you're making big major purchases, think it through 3, 4, 5 years down the road. If you're newly married, expect the unexpected, the baby to come when you least expect it. And you have to make it work, but I'm saying you can set things up to where you don't have to be so miserable, depend on parents, depend on people, depend on charge cards in order to make life work. Now, if you want to be a working mom, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. That just wasn't me. So don't write me a letter and say, women work nowadays. It's, the year 2000. I know that, but that's fine. No problem. But be honest up front with your husband. Tell him what you see your life being, and then work it out before you say I do, because once you say I do, you're stuck big time. And I don't mean that to sound so awful, but you are, and you have to work it out. And if you weren't honest with him about every little thing, then don't blame him when things go south, if you know what I mean. Okay, my next video is going to be about, well, I really don't even know, so I'm not going to say. But I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll be back with another one soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.